Hey everyone, welcome to our podcast At the End of the Day. I am Anuj Thapa.
And I am Deepika Shrestha. And with us today is Ian Hall, the Deputy Regional Director at the New York Regional Census Center in the U.S. Census Bureau. Ian, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me. I'm pleased to be here.
Today we're going to talk about the Census 2020 and why this matters.
Yes. And Ian, first of all, what is Population Census 2020?
Yeah, so we're about to start the 2020 census. In fact, the 2020 census is here on March 12th, so a few days from now. Everyone will begin to receive invitations to complete the census. And the census is a count of everybody living in the United States. Everybody must be included in the census. And so it's a count of our population. And it is critical that everyone responds to the census. It is required by the Constitution. We complete it every 10 years. So we get one chance every 10 years to make sure that we count everybody.
Yeah, when you say everybody, what does that mean? Like, does that mean, undocumented people as well?
So we count everybody living in the United States, absolutely everyone. It doesn't matter about immigration status. It doesn't matter what type of housing unit you live in. We need to make sure that we count everyone. And the message needs to be that if people are concerned that they haven't been counted, that they stand up and make sure that they respond and are counted, because everyone does count in the 2020 census.
So what about students who are studying in universities, who are basically international students? What about tourists who are for visit, and what about people who visit here for some kind of workshops or some kind of events? Do they also need to be counted?
Right. So that's where, if people are just here traveling, if they're just visiting New York City as a tourist, just here for a very brief period of time, they're not going to be counted in the census. Just as if there was someone that normally lives in New York City and they travel, they're on a trip to Japan, or they're studying very briefly for a business trip in Germany, they're going to be still counted in the United States. So it's where you normally live.
Okay, so that means students should be counted who are here for at least 1 year or 2 year program?
That's correct. If they're here as of April 1st studying here in the United States, they're going to be counted in the census.
Okay, and that's as of April 1st, 2020.
Right. So we use April 1st as kind of the reference day. Generally, we say you're going to count where you live the majority of the time. So, but if you don't have a usual household elsewhere, or you don't have a place that you normally live, we use April 1st as that reference period to count you at the place that you're living as of April 1st.
Okay. And why is it so important to be participated in the census?
Right. The census is absolutely critical. First, think money. Over $675 billion in federal funds are allocated on an annual basis based on census counts. So what does that exactly mean? What it means is that federal programs, huge federal programs, things such as highway funding, Medicare and Medicaid funding, SNAP, other types of school lunch programs, public housing programs, healthcare programs, are funded using algorithms from the census. So it is absolutely critical that we count everyone, because critical programs such as Head Start educational programs receive funding based on census counts. And so if we don't count everyone, those critical community programs can suffer and receive fewer funds. So money is a huge part of the census, but it's also about power. The cornerstone of our democracy is the census. We conduct it every 10 years to reapportion the 435 seats of the U.S. House of Representatives. So we're talking about everyone's voice in our democracy here in the United States. And if we aren't counting everyone, that power starts to reduce. We're not just talking about at the federal level. We're talking about political things at the state level, at the city level, in your community. So when we talk about the census, we're really talking about your voice, your power in our political system. And then it's also important from a knowledge perspective. It provides invaluable information about our nation's people and our neighborhoods. And so that allows people, such as community-based organizations, government and elected officials, business owners, to make informed decisions about providing services, opening up new businesses, things such as that. So really, when we kind of talk about it, I think in a quick way, you can think of it as money, power, and knowledge.
Okay. And when census starts and when people go to somebody's houses and start counting, like, do they ask for social security? Do they ask for driving license? What do they ask for?
Yeah, so the questions on the 2020 census are very basic demographic questions. So let me first start by saying we will never ask anything such as social security number. We'll never ask for bank account information. We never ask for money or any type of like political affiliation. And we do not ask anything about citizenship status at all on the census. So everybody will be invited to respond to the census beginning around March 12th of this year. You're going to receive an invitation. If you live in New York City, you're going to receive an invitation in the mail delivered by the United States Postal Service, and that'll invite you to complete the census. You're going to have 3 different ways to immediately self-respond to the census. First, you're going to be able to respond online. This is new for the 2020 census. So anyone that has a smartphone, a tablet, a laptop will have the ability to respond to the census. And what's great is you don't need to have any ID to respond to the census. Although the census will provide you an ID in that mailing that comes beginning around March 12th, you have the ability to simply enter your address. So if you misplace that, if it gets hidden, if you by accident throw it out, or you never saw it in the first place, you'll have the ability to still respond online just simply by entering your address. You'll also have the ability this census to respond on the phone. You can call a toll-free number, speak to a Census Bureau sworn employee that will be able to take your census responses over the phone. And just like in past censuses, if you choose not to respond online, if you choose not to respond on the phone, you still have the ability to complete a paper form and mail it back to the Census Bureau. So let's get back to those questions that we're going to be asking. We ask questions such as name, age, date of birth, sex, and then Hispanic origin and race. And then we ask about the relationship between the different people in the housing unit. So how is everybody related? And then we ask a simple question is of, do you live in this place under a mortgage or rent? So very basic questions about the demographics of everybody living there.
Are any of these questions that are included in the census form are of concerns to the population, to the general people?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we fully recognize at the Census Bureau that if people don't feel safe, they're not going to respond to the census. So one of the biggest messages that we need to make sure that gets out there is that the census is safe. There is an ironclad federal law, which is referred to as Title 13 of the United States Code. And that law prohibits the Census Bureau from ever releasing any information that could be used to identify an individual respondent or an individual housing unit. So we can't release information to other federal agencies, to state government. We can't release it to the city. We can't release it to any organization, and that includes all forms of law enforcement. So once again, we can't release any information that could be used to identify an individual. What the Census Bureau does release is statistical abstracts or collections of data that, again, help to describe our communities, our neighborhoods, our city, our country in an aggregate form, but never to identify anyone. So rest assured that the information that you provide to the Census Bureau is protected under that federal law, that ironclad federal law that prohibits any release of individual information.
That's interesting, yeah. And in today's time, especially, people are afraid about the misuse of data, especially if you look at social media, Facebook, Twitter, and they are always accused of using this data for their benefit. Now you're telling us that nobody has to be afraid of being counted because our data are safe.
That's correct. Your data is safe. We can never share that information. We can't release that information. It is only used for statistical purposes. Title 13 indicates that we can never use any information to cause harm to any individual that's responded or any individual housing unit that's responded.
Okay. So for those people who do not respond and do not fill out the census form, either online or by phone, you would have representative from Census Bureau come into your house, right? How does that work?
Yeah, so the best thing to do is to what we call self-response. We recognize that we get the best information when people self-respond. So when they make that decision to respond online, on the phone, or using a paper form, we get the best data. So what we're really trying to push is the highest self-response that we can get. But you brought up a good point, that there are going to be some people that still choose not to self-respond. And after a period of time, we will begin something that we refer to as non-response follow-up. which is where Census Bureau employees, these are sworn Census Bureau employees that take an oath to uphold Title 13, and they will begin to go door to door to the non-responding housing units to collect the same information that I mentioned earlier that is on that census form. And so they'll visit those housing units beginning late spring into the summer to collect that information. But the best thing is, if you self-respond, you greatly reduce the chance that we're going to have to come to your door to collect any information. And we recognize some people don't, some people don't want an uninvited guest coming to their door. So I think the best thing that we can do is indicate that self-response is the most important thing. But what's really great also is during the self-response period, we're going to be able to track self-response on a daily basis down to the census tract, or think of like a small collection of blocks in New York City. We're going to be able to track self-response. And so the Census Bureau and other community-based organizations are going to have the ability to see, hey, these couple blocks or this portion of this neighborhood has a really low self-response right now. Let's see if we can start to target that. Can we get some messaging? What are the trusted voices in that community? Who can come and try to help carry that message? And the Census Bureau is actually going to have staff that can be deployed to specific areas with tablets to help people self-respond. So maybe it's an area with internet isolation, or maybe it's just an area that hasn't heard as much about the census. We'll be able to go into those communities, maybe go to the corner bodega, maybe go to the laundromat, or go to the community center, and kind of help people self-respond that weren't aware of the opportunity.
And Ian, when somebody comes at my door, calling himself or herself as a representative of Census Bureau to count us, how do we identify that person that he or she is the staff?
Right. So any person that comes to your door as a Census Bureau employee is going to have a photo ID. They're going to have a government badge that has their photo and their name. They're going to be carrying, during the non-response follow-up period, they're going to be carrying a smartphone to collect the information, and that's going to have an insignia on it as well. And they're also going to be able to provide you with a privacy statement that explains all of the rights that I mentioned earlier about Title 13 and the confidentiality. But if anyone ever feels concerned about someone coming and knocking on the door, we urge them that there's ways to get in touch with the Census Bureau to confirm identity. But again, sometimes what we've noticed is that when we start the non-response follow-up period, people don't open their door the first time. Our staff's going to leave a little bit of a little piece of paper called a notice of visit that's going to indicate, hey, the Census Bureau is here. We're trying to collect your self-response. Some people are like, all right, the Census Bureau means business. They're coming to get the data. Why don't we actually go self-respond? So even when that non-response period begins, you can still self-respond. And that little card is going to indicate how to still self-respond. And what's interesting is we see an actual jump in self-response right when that happens, because a lot of people make that decision that they want to self-respond and choose not to interact with. But it's critical that we get that data. So it's also important that when we begin that that non-response follow-up operation, that the community, that you talk to your neighbors and say, hey, we really need to make sure we're counted. Let's invite these census takers or enumerators into our building so that they can conduct this incredibly important work. I think it's also important to note that when you respond online or over the phone, you'll have the ability to do it in 12 non-English languages. So you'll be able to go online and respond, for instance, in Russian. You'll have that ability. At the same time, you'll have the ability to call 12 specific numbers for non-English languages. So if you want to respond, for instance, in Korean, you'll have the ability to call a toll-free number directly and begin to speak with a Census Bureau representative that speaks Korean. So you're not going to have to call like a single number and try to figure out how to get to a specific language. That person on the other line is going to immediately pick up and begin to speak in your language and will be able to help you complete the census. We fully understand that there's many more languages than 12 that are spoken in the country, specifically here in New York City. So we'll also be providing language guides guides and how-to videos. Think of like a YouTube video that explains how to respond to the census. And we'll be providing those online guides, those glossaries, and the print guides in 59 non-English languages to help people respond to the census as a tool so they'll be able to participate this decade. The best place to go for up-to-the-date information about the census, including language information, or if you have any other additional questions, is to go to 2020census.gov.
So, Ian, because most of our audience are recently arriving immigrants in the U.S., why is it important for them to participate in the census count?
Right. I think it's incredible. It's important for everyone to count in the census, but lots of the programs, if people are coming here for education opportunities, job opportunities, the census provides, like I mentioned earlier, those $675 billion in federal funds on an annual basis. And a lot of that goes to things that can help and provide services to people that have recently immigrated to the United States. Mm-hmm. It's also important to stand up and be counted. The census helps to provide information about the Voting Rights Act and the enforcement of the Voting Rights Act. So it's important that we start to see how our communities, how our neighborhoods are changing. And that's why it's really important that people respond to the race question. And you have the ability to check multiple boxes or multiple racial categories, and you have the ability to write things in. And that helps to provide information. That information can be used by the government, can be used by New York City to ensure that services are being provided, and to start to see that neighborhoods, the dynamic of neighborhoods or the makeup of neighborhoods have changed. And what does that mean? Is the neighborhood becoming younger? Is it becoming older? Does that mean we need to provide different types of services? Are the schools adequate in this area? Do we have enough senior centers in this community? Things such as that. Yeah. So I think it's incredibly important that as people immigrate to the United States, that we get the correct information. And remember, we only get a chance once every 10 years to count everyone. And I need to mention it again. It doesn't matter your immigration status. It doesn't matter your citizenship status. We just need to count absolutely everybody living in the United States.
Ian, one more question. So especially in New York City, there are so many families living in a single unit, and how do you guys counting those families?
Right. That's a really great question. Mm-hmm. We know that as, for instance, in New York City, mm-hmm. as the population grows, housing is very difficult. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of cases, there might be multiple families living in one unit, or they might be someone living in a subdivided unit that maybe is not fully identified with its own address or by the city and stuff. Mm-hmm. And so the messaging needs to be that we need to count everyone. Mm-hmm. And so an example might be that family that's living in a single apartment, two families living in a single apartment. They don't consider themselves related. They might not even really communicate with each other that much. It's just that's the current situation of their life, or of what's kind of going on. And although there's only going to be a single census package that's delivered to that apartment, we need to make sure that everybody's counted. And so if the two families don't communicate, they can still self-respond. Because when I mentioned earlier that you have the ability to go online and self-respond, or call a toll-free number and provide your census response, you can do that without an ID, and we can accept more than one response from an individual address. So that ensures that those two families could self-respond separately if they chose to do so. Mm-hmm. And that's that opportunity. But we just need to make sure everybody's counted. And so even if you have a housing unit or your apartment and you have a guest staying, someone that's crashing on your couch for a couple weeks, or you've opened up a basement apartment, we need to make sure that those people are counted. Because oftentimes those are people that are missed in previous censuses, are people that are in these different types of housing units. Sometimes we call them hidden housing units, but we need to make sure that that information gets out there.
So Ian, I just want to mention this because this is something I found really interesting. As I was going through the Census Bureau census count of 2010, so because I am from Nepal, I was definitely interested in the number of Nepalese population in New York State. To my surprise, it was only around 150 or 123. I cannot remember the number top of my head, but obviously I know that is not the correct number. So I was literally shocked. And so what I'm trying to raise is, why is it an important topic for immigrant communities to be conscious about the actual reflection of their number?
Right. And that's something that we've heard. I've been to lots of different community events, and we've heard that one of the reasons that some people are saying that it's critically important that we're counted is so that our numbers are reflected. People are saying, because I want to be counted. I was at a recent event where it was new immigrants from Africa, and they were saying that we want to show up in the numbers. We want to show that there's a critical mass here in New York City or in New York State. And so I think that's kind of what you're mentioning kind of hits home with that. In this census, you do have the ability to, like I mentioned earlier, you on the race question, you can check multiple races. You have the ability to write in races, and that's going to allow the Census Bureau to eventually publish much greater detail information about the racial makeup of our country. And that information is used by the states to ensure that we're providing equitable access to voting for various racial and language groups. It also provides services to those groups. That information is used by, for instance, New York City to ensure that it's providing services in the appropriate languages. Without the information, we might not know that there is a new emerging immigrant group in one of the boroughs that needs support. What type of support does it need? And that information comes from the census, because this is the official count of our entire country and the racial makeup of our country.
Thank you so much for your time, Ian.
Absolutely.
So before we sign off, we would like to say thank you to the English-speaking union, ARNIC, for providing us the space to record this conversation today with Ian. And keep following us on our website, podcast@theendoftheday.com, and follow us on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you have found this podcast, and also follow us and subscribe us on YouTube.
Yes, time to go. So goodbye.
Take care. Bye. Thank you. Hi guys. We have the 100th episode of our weekly podcast at the end of the day coming soon.
So we would like to invite you to our 100th episode.
We would like to acknowledge you and celebrate all the amazing guests we had in our podcast.
So please send us your feedback.
Send us your feedback and wishes for us.
Text us, send us your audio feedback, video feedback, anything you want to say for our 100th episode.